Today is lecture number 4. Misteko. Takukwe ni. Misteko. Very interesting. All right. So we got a lot of buenos dias. Very nice. Good morning, everybody. Buenos dias. Um, so this is lecture number 4. And as I told you before, you don't have any final examination oral. You only have final exam that is written. So it's really an easy final exam. The final exam is on the material for lectures 1, 2, 3, and 4 from your class manual. We completed most of them last week, but we still have a couple more lectures actually to discuss in this class. The final exam will be available to all of you after the class ends at 2 o'clock. You'll be able to go to the site and on the left, click where it says written exam, and then you can complete it. You're all asked to complete the final examination by Monday, September 12th, midnight. It means that next week, you can, if you want to, come to this site and do your final examination at 11 o'clock as, regular time. But you don't have to do that. You can take it during the week, and then you have the Saturday off, or whenever you want. But it has to be completed by Monday, September 12th, 12 midnight. Now, you will get your report card either the 13th or the 14th. I think it's in the 14th. And your next course begins on September 17th, 2 weeks from now. I was telling the students in the previous course that if you look at the class schedule, I'm looking at the class schedule in our website. The next course, which is the Interpreting Superior Court Misdemeanor course, which is really the key course in this program, starts on September 17, ends on October 15. I think I told you about this. And then the following course, which is felony, begins on November 12th. So you have about 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks break, which is excellent for your class. It just happens I'm going to be out of the country, so that's why I'm not holding any classes during that period of time. But it's just excellent. The reason being that you will see once you take the next course. It has a lot of material. It's really tough. It requires a lot of time. I can tell you right now, it's going to take a lot of time. And usually most people are unable to do everything they're supposed to do during that 4 or 5 week period. So by having another 4 weeks, it really helps you because you will still have access to your class and therefore complete some of the practices. And of course, the last day on October, what day would that be? The 8th. I'm going to let you know what you need to do to get ready for during the 4 weeks. So it works really well for you. I mean, it wasn't intended like that. It just happens that you are lucky this quarter and you have more time to review that material. So now let's talk a little bit about this course right here. Let's see. You mentioned last time the state exam is offered twice a year. What other month is offered other than March? September generally. September, yeah. Sorry about that. I think in spring and fall, I look online. Yes, so it's going to be September is typically when it is offered, sometimes early October. So technically, they should offer it this month. They're not offering this year, but they're going to. I heard that they're going to go back to normal scheduling next year, 2023. For some reason, I still don't know. They use this COVID excuse for everything now. So they said everything is because of COVID, right? So COVID, it's now under control, and therefore, they should be offering the exams. But I think what is actually happening is that most people working for the Judicial Council or maybe even for the testing entity, they just want to work from home. They don't want to go to the office, and that's creating a lot of issues, not only in your exam, but in general overall, right? It's just not an environment that is suitable for efficiency when you have people in different houses interpreting. interpreting, working from different houses or different places. So I think that's exactly what is happening, and we're all suffering because of that. But they said that they will definitely um, have the regular schedule starting to 2023. Let's hope that's indeed the case. And if that is the case, then it will be offered in the last 2 weeks in March and the last 2 weeks in September. That's generally when they offer that exam. So going back to our class now, and we're talking about the this consecutive course. I know we still have to look at some vocabulary. We'll do that later on. We still have to do a little bit more practice, which we will do that later on as well. Maybe some consecutives to get you ready for your simultaneous for the misdemeanor course. But what we really want to talk about is how to use those techniques in an actual consecutive and those tools that we talk about. So let's just work on that now. We're not going to develop the technique any further, but we're going to be implementing it to our to a typical consecutive, because everything that we have been doing so far, it was just basically on different segments, right? And we just did things on a given segment, and that's all. That's what all it was. I dictated just a segment, and that was about it. But in reality, when we use this technique, we have to use this technique or approach or tool in an actual consecutive. So let's just look at what we call, instead of techniques, we're going to call it approaches. We have the first one, and what does it mean by an approach? An approach is, what tool do I use to solve this problem? And what do I mean by that? Well, whenever you do a consecutive, you hear a question and you hear an answer. Not all answers are suitable for the technique that we learned. Some answers do not require that technique. So these approaches or tools are what we are going to be implementing for each of those segments. And then the key would be to find out a little bit before, like right before the person begins answering the question in Spanish, find out what's the probability of using tool number 1 versus tool number 2 versus tool number 3. So when you're interpreting in a consecutive mode, you have the following tools. You may have an answer provided that there is no need to take any notes. So if the question is, were you at the scene of the crime? And the answer is C, no notes. Why do you want to take notes? That's the end of it. Or if the answer is rather short, that's the end of it. Just simply don't take notes. If the answer is, what is your name? Jose Perez, I don't need to take that down, although that's factual information, but I really don't need to take it down. So there is one approach, is that no notes. Now you may say, well, how do I know if I should use that approach number 1 or any approach that you're going to explain later on? Well, I'll let you know at the end what is the element that tells us what approach to use. You have to always keep in mind that the interpreter has to adapt to the consecutive. And by that, it means that the interpreter has to be flexible. You cannot expect to use one technique that you feel very comfortable with, use that technique throughout your consecutive, because that's not going to happen. You're going to need to implement different approaches, different tools, right? So you cannot be using what we developed in this class for every single segment, because for some segments that approach is not suitable. So one approach is no notes. The other approach we call factual information. And factual information is where you're going to write on a piece of paper just the facts. And what by that I mean, well, not the facts, but the factual information, such as an address. What's an example of factual information? Address, names, numbers, I mean figures in general, right? License plates. All that will be considered to be factual information. A account numbers, that's factual information. Just write it on a piece of paper without any particular technique or anything. Not like as we did that we developed that technique that it's so powerful. Another possibility that we have is going to be number 3, and that is where you're going to use the approach developed in this class. And you may remember this is the approach where you wrote oops, what is that? Like each column. Remember that? We did that. And that's another possibility. And the other one is that I call that plan B, sort of whenever every approach fails or doesn't apply. So it's kind of plan B. And plan B is basically write one word below the other. We're going to further develop that today. So basically, when we're doing our consecutive, the notes usually are for the answers, not for the questions, right? But the questions, you may need some notes as well. So we're going to talk about that shortly. But when you receive an answer and you have to transfer that, when you're acquiring the answer, when you're getting the information from the answer, then one of the things that you ask is, okay, should I use no notes, or should I just use factual information where I write numbers, dates, amounts, whatever the case is? Or should I use the approach that I learned in class? Or should I go to plan B that I will also learn in class today? And the answer to that question depends really on the question that is asked. Because in any consecutive, you have a set. There is a question, and then there is an answer. And that's what we call a module. A module is the question and answer. And the question gives you an idea, what the answer might be, or what type of answer it could be. If the question, for example, says, please tell us what happened at the scene of the crime, then you expect a lot of information. So certainly number 1 will not be suitable, right? Factual information. Well, it's not going to be only factual information when the witness answers that question. There will be more than factual information. Well, what else could it be? Well, it could be that in the answer, there's going to be a lot of people interacting and this person is describing what happened. So it will definitely, in that case, be number 3. If the question, for example, is please tell us your full name, I mean, it could be number 2 because it's going to be a name, but sometimes you don't need to write it down. If the name is Juan Perez, I don't need to write it down. So it could be 1 or 2, really. It depends on you may start with 2, thinking that it's going to be mainly a long name, but it could end up being a short name and you don't write the whole name. So you start writing it, Juan Perez. So you write J-U-N, and then you know that it ended. You stop writing and say Juan Perez. So I technically didn't take any notes. If the question is, tell us with a yes or no, did you see the defendant when blah, blah, blah? Obviously, will be no notes. That's the expectation. If the question is, what happened when you were waiting for the bus at the corner of First and Main, then maybe number 3. Because clearly you're not going to do acquire that segment without any notes. You're going to need notes. And it's just the answers is not going to be just factual information. It's going to be more than factual information. So you got to do approach number 3. If the question is, for example, can you please describe the person who tried to rob you? If it's a description, then we might use the description for it. It falls into kind of plan B, because within plan B, we have something we're going to be learning today, but it will be a description like the ones that we learned already. It's just a circle, and then that's the face of an individual and what we learned already. So it will fall into plan B descriptions. If the so the question gives you a lot of information as to what will be the most likely type of answer, but it doesn't give you really information on the answer itself, but it gives you information on what type of approach you should be ready for. And that's what we're going to look at it today with an example, right? We're going to look into an example. We're going to do it consecutive, and you're going to be doing accordingly. You're going to tell me what to do, and then you're eventually going to. So it's going to be kind of fun and applying all this. But so you got to remember now that what do we do with questions, by the way? So for questions, we only take notes if it's number 2, that is factual information. So if the question has any factual information, we'll write it down. So we use approach number 2 for questions. And we are limited to approach number 2. We're not going to use any other approach that you see here for questions. Maybe no notes is another approach, of course. But it's going to be number 2 or number 1. Number 1 meaning no notes, just only memory. So when we hear the questions, what we do is we don't take notes. We are not thinking about taking notes. And the only thing that we do is we write down any information in that question that includes factual information, like a name, an address, a location. So for questions, that's a rule for all questions. So if I say, please tell me what happened the night of December 10, 2021, then December 10, 2021, you need to write it down. But the rest, you don't have to write anything down. You have to remember it. If the question is, please tell us what happened when you arrive at the party, no notes. If I say, for example, were you at the corner of First and Main on November 10, 2021 at 10 p.m.? Definitely notes, factual information. So questions are limited only to approaches 1 and 2. Usually we assume is approach number 1, but if we have to, we can only use approach number 2. Nothing that has to do with approach 3 or 4. Okay? Now, plan B is what I actually call, it's a plan that we use when we need to, when not other approaches work. And you know they will not work. Because if I ask you a question such as, what did he look like? I cannot use any approach. I mean, you say, well, what about factual information? Because it's a description. Yeah, but it's very difficult to write down a description one word below the other. So in Plan B classifies or includes a lot of things. One of them is that face, right? Okay, so that's for descriptions. So, he had blue eyes, black hair, a tattoo in the right cheek, and the tattoo had a number 32. Gotta remember, this is right, this is left. He was 5'8" and 195 pounds. So that's how you do that. It's just Plan B. You don't use any approach. You just say Plan B. It's just write that down. That's it. Just use it for only that question. Another thing that may happen with Plan B is it's something that really you realize that nothing will work. No approach will work for this question. So in which case, the other option is for you to write one word below the other. And when we talk about writing one word below the other, we're going to develop this even further today. It's not just about writing a lot. It's about writing sufficient notes to help you remember the original. So this is what we're going to be developing today. Okay, we're going to develop today later on. But in looking at this, the first thing I wanted to do is, I'm going to actually give you different questions Okay, and based on the question, you're going to tell me which approach you would use, either 1, 2, 3, or 4. And remember, you would use number 4 when none of those 1, 2, or 3 work, or you think it will not work. So the approach is, okay, well, I'm going to use number 4 because that's it's kind of my zero column. Remember when we learn our technique, that's kind of what it is. It's my zero column, right? So having said that, I'm going to dictate a question, and then you're going to write in the block what number you expect, what is the what number, what approach number, these are called approaches, you expect to use to acquire the information from the answer, not from the question, clearly. Remember, the question is what gives you a good hint about the answer. So let's see how it goes. Just write it as soon as I finish, okay? So go ahead, here we go. Could you please tell us what happened when you went to Jose's house to attend the party that took place on November 10, 2021? So which of those approaches you think would be the best one for the answer? Okay, just for the answer. We know that in the question you probably wrote down November 10, 2021. We're talking about, based on the question, which one will be the one? Wow, it's a variation of numbers. So if I ask somebody, could you please tell us what happened? What are we going to get in return? We're going to get a narrative. The person is going to be saying certain things. And when you look at what happened there, most likely there's going to be people and there's going to be interaction between people. So the answer to this question is number 3. So you wouldn't use number 4 because number 4 is used when you cannot use 1 or 2 or 3, but really number 3 is the best answer to this question. Because whenever you say what happened, can you tell us how, who were present and what were they doing? That type of thing calls for the approach that we have been learning the last 3 weeks. Because it allows you to have different people and different interaction. If you go to plan B, which is number 4, yes, you may write one word below the other, but then you're not using the best technique for the best answer. And certainly not number 2, because what happened, you don't expect any numbers or addresses or names. Maybe there are some addresses in the answer, or maybe there are some names in the answer, but that's okay. But you use number 2 only when you hear only in the answers that include address, names, and numbers, not just the whole narrative. And certainly you wouldn't decide to use number 1 because no notes. It's not going to be a good idea to try to remember such a long explanation, right? So let's see, what about the next one? Okay, so let's say the question is, what happened when you were at the corner of First and Main waiting for the bus that made you call 911? So what technique would you use or approach? Yes, indeed, the answer is number 3. It wouldn't be number 2 because why would I say number 2? Tell me. So tell us what happened what that made you call 911 when you were at the corner or whatever. Maybe in the question you got to take that factual information, but we're not looking at the question. We already know what to do with the question. What we're looking at is the answer. In the answer that you're about to get, what do you expect the answer to include? If I ask you, Tell us what happened when you were at the corner of First and Vermont waiting for the bus that made you call 911. Do you expect Jose Perez, 19762 North Main? Uh, I don't know, anything that has to do with factual? No, you expect a narrative. He's going to tell you what happened. So therefore, you go to number 3. So narratives always go to number 3. Now, it's true that the question required some number 2, but we're not looking at the question. It's very clear for us that the question, we can only use number 2 if we have to, because the question may have a name, an address, or whatever. But it's only going to be 1 or 2. We know that. It's very clear. The question is, when you listen to the question, what do you expect would be the right approach for the answer that is about to be answered? So, no, it has nothing to do with the question. Doesn't go in. No, the question doesn't go to any empty column. So I'll show you how to integrate all this in a second. But what we are looking at right now is for you to be able to identify which approach to be used based only on the information given to you by the question. And it's basically which approach you're going to be used in acquiring the answer. Okay, so that's what we're looking at right now. Let's do another one. Can you tell us what's your address? What will be the proper approach for that? Yeah, the approach is for the answer, not for the question. Can you tell us what your address is? What approach should you use? Yeah, that's self-explanatory. Is not number 1. So Margarita and Joan think that they can remember an address. Try this. Vivo en el 20.417 al norte de la 172 en el apartamento 140, no, perdón, el apartamento 317 en la ciudad de Los Ángeles, California 90244. You can't do it with number 1. What would you do number 1? Remember, it's what approach you will use for the answer, not the question. Not for the question. It's always for the answer. We don't worry about the question. Only for the answer. We hear the question so that based on the question, we determine what would the answer be. And based on what type of answer, we don't know the content of the answer, but what type of answer, then we'll decide what approach to use. Let's try another one. Did you see him when he killed Maria? What approach would you use for that one? Yeah, one word or yes, short answers, Sabrina. Yeah. So did you see him when he killed Maria? What approach would you use for that, or you would expect to use? Yeah, number 1. Because the answer, why would you have number 2? Did you see him when he killed Maria? Why would you expect the answer to have an address or a name or numbers? Remember, we are not talking about the question. We are only looking at the possible answer, not about the question, okay? So it has to be number 1 because this clearly it's going to probably be no or C. That's all there is to it, right? Let's look at another one. So when you were at his place and the gang member walked into the house, can you tell us what happened in the house while these two face each other? What approach would you use for that?